to the cloud. And the next thing is I'm going to highlight me so it doesn't switch every time people talk, so you can see what I'm going to do. This fly is the second fly I'm going to tie. And this one here is the first one. And the incentive for me to tie this is I had a nice long email from my friend that lives in Sydney that I fished with on Aitutaki, and he's off with his wife in the next few weeks to fish what they call willow grubs on the South Island of New Zealand. And so we don't have willow grubs here, but I thought the fly was kind of interesting. So this one is again an old English fly that comes back probably as far back as the 1800s. The materials are pretty, so it's the more simple of the two. So the materials are pretty simple. The hook is, I picked these up when I was down in Bellingham for a reasonable price. It's a size 10, moderate shank wet fly hook. So I'll get that guy out. We'll put him in the vise. And keep it point exposed, get it in there pretty solid. Thread is 8/0 black. And I picked up some nano thread, and I was going to try tying it with this nano thread, but I didn't like it. It's not spun tight. It's a tough material, all right, but it tends to spread out, and I found it really slippery. It didn't hold on to things. So I went back to my standard UTC, and I'm going to start it right at the point here. And I will run the thread back to the bend. Get my scissors out. And at the bend here, I'm going to make just a little bump of thread. And then I'm going to bring the thread just in front of the bump. So you can see there's a little thicker spot there. And what that's going to do is that's going to help set up the tail. Now, the tail and the wing are mallard flank. For the tail, you don't really care so much, but for the wing, you want a mallard flank that has got the same length of feathers on either side of the stem. And I've got a little package which I've been playing with, and I picked out the ones that have the most even. And ones that aren't even, I'm going to use for the tail. So this one, I take roughly, pull off from the side about a gap width of mallard flank, like that. And I pull all the tips together so the tips are nicely evened up. Come on, get free there. And then I just pull them off the stem so the tips are nicely evened up. And I'm going to hold that, measure it against the shank. I only want shank length, and I want to stick out probably the gap of the hook behind the bend is how far I want the tail to stick out. And I'll just do a quick little pinch wrap on that, right in front of that bump. And the purpose of the bump is to keep the tail up. And I know that's a little hard to see, but and then I just wrap up the shank of the hook over top of the mallard flank till I get my thread about an eye width and a half or 2 eye widths behind the eye. And then I'll trim it off. Bring my thread back, open spiral over to back to where I tied in, just in front of where I tied in the tail. And the next thing is the body. And next thing is the body. And this is try finding plain white chenille these days. Everything has got some variation of white. You get this sparkle white here. This is probably as clean as it's called speckled white chenille. And I've got some other stuff here that's sort of pearl, but it's quite fine. So if you're tying it on smaller hook size, you might want something like that. And all I do with this is I'm going to take a bit out of the bag to make it easy to handle. And I'm done with that. What I do is I take the end here and I'll pull off a bit of the sparkle so that you can see there's some clear, just the threads. And I'll lay that down where now I keep forgetting that after you wrap the thread up and down the hook, it tends to unwind a bit. And it tends, if you make a soft loop, it tends to flop forward. But if you spin it counterclockwise, then when you come up, that soft loop flops towards the back and makes it a little easier to tie that in. So I'll tie it in just in front of the tail, and I'll wrap the string right back to where I had the tail tied in. So now the first wrap is going to be part string and part chenille. Bring my thread all the way up to, again, just in front of the eye, or just behind the eye, I should say, about 1.5 eye widths behind the eye. Take my hackle pliers, and this chenille, you can see it's kind of ragged. It's not really even. They seem to all be like that. So I grab it with the hackle pliers. And with these Griffin ones, it's really easy to do this. I just spin the daylights out of it so that it gets nice and round spiral. You can see now it's nice and tight. And I'll do a wrap around it. Each time I do a wrap, because it tends to undo that spinning, I will give it a twist. And this time it's a clockwise twist. And do close spaced wraps all the way up the shank. And then when I get up to the front, I'll do one last wrap where the thread is hanging just behind the eye width. Hold it on top and throw the thread in there a couple of times. Pull it back a bit, wrap a couple in front. And slide my scissors down the chenille and trim it off. And you'll see I'm really close to the eye of the hook, but there's a little bit of space there. I need to have enough space to have a head put, so I just move my thread back a bit. Now the wing, and this is the mallard flank when I've been cutting sections out of the wing. I want 2 sections of mallard flank for this guy. So what I do is I pick it, like one of the problems with these mallard flanks, let's see if I can find the other one here. One of the problems with mallard flanks is that they aren't even. They tend to get a little fuzzy at the tips on the sides. You can see this is a little bit fuzzy and this is not. So I have to start further up the stem to get the stuff that's not fuzzy. And turn it with the curve facing away from me. Come in from the side at about a 45-degree angle with the point of my scissors just shy of the hook with about a gap length of feather, and I'll snip. And I'll take that batch off. You see there's about a gap width of feather. And I'm going to set that down on the table in front of me with the curve up like that. turn the feather over, and you can see where the little snip was. I'll put my scissors at that same 45-degree angle, close to, took my scissors right at the stem and snip. And by doing that, I get 2 slips off of that feather that are the same width. And then what I'll do is I'll take the 2 curved, the one that's on the table, the face is curved up, and this one is curved down. And I'll lay it down on the table. You can't see this, but I'll lay it down on the table and line the tips up. So now I see I've got both feathers, both curved in with the tips lined up, and they're nice and tight together. That gives you a nice wing. I'll measure the wing so that it's just shy of the tail. And that's where I'm going to tie it in. I want the thread about 2 eye widths behind because I need to get the hackle on. I'll put that down on top of the hook right in between my fingers where the thread is. Bring the thread up back in between my pinched fingers, down the far side, but don't pull down yet. Back up between my fingers and then pull up. This is more important when you're dealing with quill wings, but it equally works as well with these ones like that. And you can see there's my wing sticking up at the back. I'll lift up the front and put a wrap in front, and then bring my scissors right down the excess and lay the side of the scissors on the eye of the hook so that it doesn't clip my thread. And this is the point where I'm going to tie in the hackle, is right where I've tied that wing in. Now the hackle is one of these guys. This is a hen hackle, and I used to be able to buy these like $6 for a hen hackle. I think they're a little more expensive now. And I've got a whole raft of these in different colors. Where's the other one here? So that's the light brown one, and I also have a dark brown one, and I've got them in a bunch of different colors. For this fly, I like the light brown one. Now I'm going to pick one that's got more brown. This one has a mixture of brown and white, so I'm going to pick one that has more brown than white as hackles. And I just real quickly, I'll try to get the hackle fibers sort of shank length. So I'll pick one that's got hackle fibers that are shank length, roughly. And I'll see if I can get him out of here. That one looks a little long, but it should do. There we go. Okay, so now I have a single hackle. You can see. So the trick with this now is I move all the fuzz off the bottom to make it easier to handle the stem. So I just pull it off the stem. There's my, I'll turn it over so that the curve side is facing me, or the curve is facing away. And I'll grab the tip, and I'll take about a shank length worth of stem, and I will gently stroke those fibers backwards so they stand out at the side. And you can see that up against my shirt. So there we go. That's going to be the hackle, roughly. And to tie it in, I need a little more than that. The idea is that I'm going to get 3 to 4 wraps if I do that. Now I take this up, and I will take my scissors and I will trim where I've made that little V. I'll trim it about 1/16 of an inch ahead. So now you see I've got this little bit of hackle that sticks out the front. And what I do with that is I take the hackle and lay it on the hook shank where that V is. There's a couple of mallards there. So I'll take that little triangle that I left, and the purpose of that is it holds the hackle in. Helps hold the hackle in when you tie it in. Now, let's get set again here. A couple of those fibers went the wrong way. Picky. Saves me having to trim later. And I'll put that V right there and snug it up. So now my hackle is on the hook on the near side, curving away from me with that V in front. I'll take my fingernail and take that little V and I bend it back and wrap in front of it. And the purpose of that is it locks in that hackle. So now I can't pull it out. Otherwise it tends, if you just did bare stem, it would probably try to pull out. Grab the hackle with my rotary hackle pliers, or any pair of hackle pliers, but I like these Griffin ones. Now when I stand it straight up, you'll see that the curve curves to the back like that. And I'll take my fingers and wet them a bit and slip them back like that. And this is what's called folding the hackle. So it's folded around the stem, so all the fibers face the back. Then I can wrap around the hook. And each time I come under, I give it a little bit of a stroke again, so that all the fibers are pointing backwards. That's two. And here comes the third. Bring the stem up, and I will do the same here. Wrap behind the stem. Wrap in front of the stem. And once again, what I'll do with this, with the thread hanging, is I'll get on, just on the stem, I'll run my points of my scissors down and just snip the stem. Wet my fingers and stroke these hackle fibers back, and I'll build a little head. And what that does is, as a wet fly, it keeps the hackle fibers pointed back, and it gives you room for a small head. Use my whip finisher, get in here, put 3 wraps. And when for those who use this whip finisher, when I go to pull up the loose loop, I make sure that the hook on my whip finisher is even with the eye. If you don't do that, sometimes what you'll do is you'll snag a couple of those hackle fibers and they'll pull them forward and stick out over the eye. But if I do this and then move the hook forward, then it doesn't do that. That is the first one. And that is what you would use for willow grubs. I'm not sure what you would use here. And because some of the willow grubs I found looking through the literature, they tend to be a pale yellowish color. So I've tied some in yellow chenille, and I've taken some photos of these, and I'm going to send them down to my Australian friend and see if he's prepared to try that the next time he goes down to South Island of New Zealand, down around Invercargill, to fish for the willow grub fall. Apparently that's a heck of a good deal to do, because the willows overhang the river, and the willow grubs fall off the willows and float down the river, and the fish tend to hide under there and pick them off. So it's a little tricky to cast, but I guess it can be pretty spectacular. Anyway, here, I think you could use this anywhere you'd want to find a light colored wet fly to try. Now the next one, I think this one is this guy here. And this is just, I remember I said I was going to tie you guys some very old flies. Well, yeah, So both of these flies are traditional English wet flies. These go back to the 1800s. This particular one, I think, became a little more popular in the eastern states in about 1938, 1940-ish. And it's a little more complicated, so I left that for the second fly. Same hook. It's just a standard number 10 wet fly hook. I like these Daiichi because they have like a micro barb on them. It's not a huge barb, and it's really easy to bend the barb down out of the way. Just a little pinch with the hackle with the pliers. And again. So any questions on the first one? All good. Okay. So this one is a little more complicated, but it's a classic English wet. This one I'm going to use red thread. That's the pattern calls for red thread. It's 6/0. And I will start it just in front of the point of the hook and wrap that down. Now this has a red tag, hence the red thread. So I wrap to the bend and trim off the bit that I'm not using. And I will wrap this thread all the way down and around the corner, so that it's right down, right at the back of the bend. And then I'll wrap back up, covering it up so I get a nice little red tag. We used to do this on prince nips because we found, I think over the years, that the prince nip with the little red tag seemed to work just a little better than the other ones. Pardon me for a minute while I look something up here. Trying to remember what the heck the name of this thing is. Rats. We'll worry about it later. Okay, yeah, the first one is called the Reuben Wood. This one's called Watson's Fancy. So Watson must have been the guy who tied it. Now, it's going to have a little bit of a tail as well. So I'll do the same thing as I did with the Reuben Wood. I will make a little bump of red thread. And then right in front of it, I'll let my thread hang. The tail on this guy is golden pheasant crest, which is this guy, this stuff. And all I want is a few strands. I don't need a whole whack of it, just to give a little color to the tail. And again, what I do is I'll measure it here, but I won't pull it off. I'll do the same thing with my scissors as I did with the mallard flank. I'll get in here and I'll cut a slip of them that is about the width that I want, right there. And by doing it that way, you'll see that all the tips stay lined up. I don't have to try and maneuver them. And I'm going to put so that basically the tail is a little more than gap width behind the bend of the hook. We'll wrap down on that. And I'm going to make one wrap. I'll lift it up and I'll make one wrap in behind and let that hang. And the purpose of that wrap in behind is to keep the tail from curving down. I'll do the same thing with the butts on this. We'll wrap them right up the hook shank, right to where the eye is, and then bring my thread back to a little bit in front of the tie-in point for the tail. Hey, Florian, you'll be pleased to see I'm using these little spool keepers. This is the next thing is the rib, and it says flat gold but tinsel. This unfortunately is the two-sided tinsel where it's silver on one side and gold on the other. It's what I've got. So I tie this on to make sure that the gold is out. I tie it on with the silver facing up or away from the hook shank. And I'll do it. I need to give my thread a spin. Counterclockwise spin it to take the twist out. There you go. And I've captured it there with the silver out. On the near side of the hook, take it back to where the tail. Oh, yeah. I forgot to tell you about this. I will tell you. The other trick with getting its silver side out is that, again, this tinsel is really slippery. So what you got to do is get your first wraps, and then you take that tip, that tag that you just tied down, and you bend it over, and then you wrap it up. And that way, when you haul on the tinsel to start wrapping it, it's not going to pull out like it just did. And I'm going to just give a little extra here of the tinsel so that I can get my little spool thing hanging here so it doesn't get in the way. So I hang it on my material clip. And you'll see that there's that little bit of tinsel. I'm going to sneak out of there. There you go. Again, another spool. We're going to start at the back with the black floss. And this is just standard silk floss. And I like floss. It gives you an opportunity to build a nice body by manipulating how well it's twisted or how well it's not twisted. So I come up here halfway and I will just do a loose wrap over the floss. Over the floss. And then rather than trim it, I make that loose wrap and then I just pull back on the floss so that there's just a tuft sticking out. And then wrap back towards where the tail is tied in and the tinsel is tied in. And then I'll wrap forward with open wraps to just behind the eye. And at this point, I'm going to throw a quick little, I'm going to leave it hang. Now, by manipulating this spool of thread, I can either spread out or tighten up the floss. So as I go over, you see that it's fairly flat. It's twisted, so it just untwists and it goes flat. And I'll run that flat up. As I do this, it's gonna want to untwist even more. So every once in a while, I will take a twist the wrong way to keep making it flat. And when I get up halfway up the hook shank, I'll go back, again trying to keep it so that it's take a twist this way to try and unwrap the floss of it so it's nice and flat where it's going up against the hook shank. And again there, and now that it's good and flat, I can manipulate the shape of that body. And because it's gotten a little too tapered for me, I'm just going to undo another wrap and do another wrap over top so that it's nice and even. Then we'll do the same thing. We'll hold her up. I'll bring my thread back, this open wraps, get it back to where I want it. And put the thread through. 1, 2, wrap in front. And come in here with my scissors on top and snip that. Pardon me. Now, red floss. So I'll do this. I will do the same thing as I did before. Bring my thread forward a little bit, and I'll put the floss on top, a single wrap, and then I'll draw the floss back so that I don't have to get my scissors in there and cut it. I'll take my thread right back to where I can overlap, just slightly overlap the black. Bring my thread forward right to the eye, and we'll do the same thing with the red. I'm going to try and keep the floss open and flat like that. That's too flat. So when it starts being too flat, I just need to make a clockwise twist, and that will take it. Oh, come on. Counterclockwise twist. This one, there we go. And again, back to the back. And you'll see now that I've got it so that the join between the red and the black is pretty even. Bring my untwisted floss forward. And when I get all the way up to where the eye is, I'm going to leave just an eye width behind. Put my thread through there in front and trim it short. Okay. Hackle pliers again, wherever I put them. There we are. I will need later. So now I take my silver rib and I will shorten this up so I can work with it. And if I've done everything right, when I tied it in, when I put it over top, it should be the gold side out. And it's not cooperating. Okay, come on. Okay, that's happened to me before. So what I'll do is I'll take my bodkin with the silver facing up and put my bodkin up against the hook shank. And then start the wrap. And that should wrap it gold side out. No, it's not. I did this with the last one. There we go. That should be gold side out. Yes. So now that it's gold side out, I make fairly close wraps up the shank. Try and make them relatively even. And so 3 on the black and then 2 or 3 on the gold, on the red. That little trick with the bodkin is I just lay it when it's right side up. I just lay the bodkin between the tinsel and the hook, and that makes that first wrap go on the correct way around. I had to do a bit of experimenting to figure that out. Again, always cutting off on the top. I accidentally snip my thread off. Okay, now for the throat on this thing, and I have my thread virtually at one eye width behind the eye, and I'll turn the hook upside down. Now, the 2 materials for the wing and whatnot on this thing are the pattern calls for duck quills. Has anybody tried to find duck quills in a fishing shop these days? I think you're going to have to order them online. And I didn't have any dyed black duck quills. So, but the throat on this thing, which goes back to the point, is just a black hackle. And I'll take a whole bunch of fibres off of that, and I'll pull them off the hackle. That's not, let's get the other hackle here. It's a little better. There we go. This is a better hackle. So I'm going to take a whack of these, about a 1/4 inch of them, fibres, pull them off the stem. And there you can see I've got a throat. This is the throat of the fly. I measure them so the tips are just past the point. And I will wrap in here, tie them down. 30. Bring this up at one in front, just the one in front. And I'll get my scissors in here on top of the hook, in behind the eye this time, and trim the ends and do a couple of wraps. And I will pull these up as well and do a wrap in behind them to make them stand out a little bit. So now I have a throat that's just a little bit of black fiber from the where the wing is going to go in back to the point of the hook. Now the wing, so I couldn't find duck quills that are black. So what I found was goose shoulder. This was the shoulder of a goose shoulder fly feather. And I want these ones, you see down here, some of them get a little frayed. So I part the part here where the tips are relatively even and they don't have all the little frayed bits working out. And I did the same thing as I showed you with the other one. I've been cutting them out of the nice smooth part of the hook by taking my scissors and coming in first with the curved side facing away from me. And I'm going to take a little bit more than hack gap width and put my scissors just shy of the center quill and snip them. Same thing here. There's my duck quill, and I got to lay it down on the table, curve side up. Turn it over, stroke it so all of those little barbules are engaged and it doesn't separate on you when you pull it apart. And then snip the other side, having turned the feather over. And that should give me 2 feathers that are pretty much the same width. And I'll do the same thing. I'll lay the tips down on the table where the tips are lined up together. This is a little trickier because these feathers are a little more curved. Yeah, that didn't work well. Okay, I'll do it with my fingers. So what I want is the curved part of the feather facing away from me, or the bottom one curved towards me, the top one facing away. And I want to get the tips matched up as near as I can. When I get the tips matched up, then I'll have that sort of tent shape that you get with a wet fly wing, where the curves are facing each other and the tips are lined up. Now I'll measure this so that the wing end lines up with the end of the tail. And I will place it with my tie-in point where the thread is, right where the throat ends. And I will grab that with my left hand, thumb and forefinger, and I'll pinch really hard at this, holding it at this angle. And I'll do this same pinch wrap up in between the fingers, back, and then down the far side, and then back up in between the fingers, and then I'll pull up. And then the next wrap, I'll go down, and I won't pull it quite so far back, and pull it up again. And then I'll give it another wrap. And never wrap in behind that first wrap. When things are all lined up, I will pull the butt ends up, wrap in front, bring my scissors up, and once again, with the thread hanging below, I will rest my scissors on the bent down hook eye and trim. And that way I don't confirm the thread. And give a few wraps to make a head. And this is a red head. So I just want to make sure I got it clear of the eye. And build a little thread. And once again, with the whip finish, push away and pull. And 2, 3. This way, double whip finish, I don't need glue. I can trim the thread. And that's it for him. And that's Watson's Fancy. Now with duck quills, you're going to get a much neater wing than you will with these goose shoulder. But I still think it makes a pretty nice traditional wet fly. So I'll stop my, where is it here? I'll stop my, remove the spotlight. So now we can all see each other. There we go. So, any questions?
No, looks very good.
Yeah.
You can also stop recording, I think.
Yeah, I'll do that.